I knew my wedding day was doomed. The second Karen stormed across my driveway, binder in hand, and declared, "Your wedding has
Your
not been
wedding has
approved."
not been
No
approved.
hello, no warning, just a full-on power trip. The thing is, we're
These
not even
flowers
in
are
her
completely
HOA.
out of theme,
We
Dad.
never were.
Karen,
But
please, let's just
Karen,
talk
she
about this
didn't
calmly.
care.
You
She
can't
had a
just
list
do
of
that.
violations ready
No, excuse
and a
me.
weird sense of
and-
authority. I stared at her
Excuse
half
me.
in disbelief as she accused us of everything from illegal seating to improper
Let's just
flower
talk about
colors.
this.
But the real twist, I didn't know it
My
yet, but this
authority
wasn't
isn't
her
open
first
for
attack.
discussion.
And what she didn't
This is
see coming would
ridiculous.
completely flip the script. I never thought the day of our wedding would be the day I'd end up battling a self-appointed HOA dictator, but here we were. My name's Emily, and I'd like to think I'm a pretty laid-back person. I love my cozy home, my fiancé Leo, and our simple life. We had spent months planning this wedding, envisioning it as a day of celebration, laughter, and most importantly, no drama. But then Karen arrived, and well, drama is her middle name. Leo and I bought our house just across the street from Willow Creek Estates, an upscale gated community where the HOA rules the lives of the poor souls unlucky enough to live within its walls. We're not part of it. Never were. But that didn't stop Karen. Oh no, Karen was the vice president of the HOA Compliance Committee, and she had decided my wedding was going to be her personal mission. I'd heard of her before. The whispers at the local coffee shop, the side-eye glances at the grocery store. She had this reputation: all power, no chill. If you lived anywhere near her HOA, you were either with her or you were an enemy. And I was pretty sure she thought we were on the enemy list, even though we'd never agreed to be part of her HOA overlordship. That morning, Leo and I had just finished putting the final touches on the venue setup for the wedding. The string lights were up, the folding chairs neatly aligned, and the arch was decorated with garlands standing proudly in our backyard. It should have been a perfect moment, but instead we were greeted by a full-on assault in the form of Karen stomping across the driveway like she owned the street. She didn't even wait for an introduction. No pleasantries, just a sharp, "Your wedding has not been approved." That was it. She slapped down her binder like it was the holy grail of HOA law, and told me we were in violation of, well, everything. Noise violations, seating violations. Even the color of the hydrangeas Leo had painstakingly picked out was unsuitable for the aesthetic of the neighborhood. I asked her as politely as I could manage what exactly she meant. She explained that even though our house wasn't in her HOA, the wedding would affect the HOA because of traffic and noise. She had jurisdiction, she said. Karen didn't seem to care that we had never agreed to be under her jurisdiction, or that the HOA didn't even cover our street. She was on a mission, and we were simply the unlucky targets of her self-important crusade. Leo came outside, then blissfully unaware of the storm brewing, and tried to reason with her. He's always the calmer one between us. But Karen, in true Karen fashion, wasn't hearing any of it. She accused us of ignoring HOA notices that we never received because they were for the wrong address. And when Leo tried to explain, she just doubled down, claiming she'd posted the notices on the HOA bulletin board and that we were responsible for keeping an eye on it. But here's where it got ridiculous. We didn't live in the HOA. And yet she was treating us like we were her personal project, as if it was her duty to enforce rules that didn't even apply to us. It was like she had no concept of boundaries, let alone common sense. That's when I started realizing something about Karen. She didn't just want to be involved in people's lives. She needed to control them. Our wedding was simply the latest in her string of attempts to insert herself into something that had absolutely nothing to do with her. But at this point, I didn't know how far Karen would go. And I had no idea that this would only be the beginning of an HOA war I didn't ask for. At first, I thought maybe this was just a one-off incident, a temporary annoyance from a neighbor who couldn't mind her own business. But no, that would have been too simple. Karen wasn't done yet. And frankly, I wasn't even sure if she knew when to stop. It started with the cease and desist order. She returned the next day, storming up my driveway with the same confident stride, holding a thick envelope like it was her personal sword. I could already feel my patience fraying. Without so much as a hello, she launched into her attack. "I've officially filed a cease and desist," she said, as if she were announcing a Nobel Prize win. "The HOA will not allow your wedding to proceed unless you comply with all neighborhood regulations." I stood there blinking at her in disbelief. "You've filed what?" She raised her chin, the epitome of self-importance. "I'm the vice president of the compliance committee. I have full authority over events like these." I was done pretending this was just a minor misunderstanding. I knew it was time to stop being polite. "You don't have authority over my property, Karen," I said, a little sharper than I meant, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she slapped down a thick binder, the same binder, and started flipping through pages, pointing out imaginary violations. "The chairs were too close to the road," she said. "The arch was an unauthorized temporary structure. And don't even get me started on the hydrangeas. Apparently they were a color violation, according to Karen's bizarre HOA aesthetic rules. I didn't have time for this, but I did have time to record her just in case. It wasn't just her constant insults to my wedding decor that bothered me. It was the fact that she was willing to escalate things with no basis whatsoever. She knew she was wrong, but she didn't care. She didn't even want to listen. Leo came outside at the worst possible moment, still talking on the phone, his brow furrowing as he saw me standing there with Karen, who was waving her binder around like it could levitate. Karen, we've already explained this, Leo tried to reason politely. We're not in the HOA, and we've never received any notices. But Karen wasn't hearing him. She cut him off mid-sentence, accusing him of ignoring 3 official HOA notices that had supposedly been posted on the community board. Leo was calm. He explained we had never gotten anything from the HOA, but Karen wasn't interested in facts. That's your responsibility, she snapped, as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. You're supposed to monitor the community board. I was losing my patience. You want us to monitor a bulletin board for an HOA we're not even a part of? Absolutely, she said, not a trace of irony in her voice. At this point, I felt like I was in a weird alternate reality where Karen held all the cards. But that was just her first tactic. The next day, we woke up to a bright orange flyer taped to our mailbox. It was titled Event Cancellation Notice, and it was filled with made-up HOA codes that didn't apply to us. It was also notarized by someone named Philip, her 6-year-old nephew, with a novelty stamp, the kind you'd use for scrapbooking. I couldn't believe it, but as ridiculous as it was, we were dealing with someone who clearly didn't care about the law. She was out for control, plain and simple. To make matters worse, later that afternoon, 2 HOA board members showed up on our lawn. One held a clipboard, the other was clutching a walkie-talkie like he was about to call in an airstrike. They said they were there to monitor compliance, as if this were some kind of military operation. I told them to leave. They hesitated for a second, confused, and then tried to tell me they had authorization from Karen. I said Karen didn't have any authority here, but they argued back. After a short, awkward standoff, they finally shuffled away, clearly half embarrassed, but still unwilling to admit they had no business being there. That was when we got the call from our landscaper. He was on his way to install the aisle walkway when Karen stopped him in the middle of the street, mind you. She demanded he show an HOA vendor badge. The landscaper tried to explain that he wasn't working in the HOA, but Karen wasn't having it. She stood in front of his truck, blocking him from leaving. I walked outside just in time to witness her throwing a tantrum in the street. I warned her for the 3rd time to leave, and she actually said to my face, "Go ahead. Call the sheriff. The sheriff respects this community." My jaw nearly hit the floor. I said, "I doubt he respects your interpretation of reality." And then just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Karen went full Karen. That evening, as we were setting up the lights for the wedding, Karen showed up again. But this time, she was accompanied by the full HOA compliance committee. She marched up to me with her usual smug smile and declared the wedding was officially canceled. According to her, we had violated multiple community standards. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "You're free to file any complaint you want, Karen, but you have no power here." She folded her arms, clearly expecting a fight. But then Leo stepped forward, a sly grin on his face. "Actually," he said, "I'd stop now. My guest arrives tomorrow." She looked at him puzzled. "Who?" she sneered. Leo simply replied, "Someone who doesn't listen to HOA nonsense." And that's when the real twist was set in motion. The day before the wedding, I was convinced we had seen the worst of Karen. That was naive. The storm hadn't even hit yet. I stepped outside in the early morning, hoping for some peace. The wedding setup was nearly complete, but I still had a few things to check. As I walked across the yard, I saw a man standing at the edge of our driveway, measuring wheel in hand, looking as official as a city inspector. For a split second, I thought maybe he was here for a rental company delivery. But then I noticed the clipboard. It had the HOA logo on it. "Excuse me," I called, walking up to him. "What exactly are you doing?" He looked up, startled, as if he didn't expect anyone to actually live here. "I'm Greg from Compliance Enforcement," he said, trying to sound important. "I'm conducting a property impact assessment for the HOA." I raised an eyebrow. "For the HOA? Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I've been instructed by Karen," he mumbled, clearly uncomfortable. "Karen, of course," I muttered under my breath, already feeling my blood pressure rise. "Listen, you need to leave. Now." But Greg wasn't going anywhere. He said he couldn't leave until the assessment was done. "This is a compliance issue," he added, sounding like he was reciting from a script. I wasn't about to let some random HOA lackey tell me how to run my life. I planted myself in front of him and told him once again that he was trespassing. Just as I thought he might back off, I heard a voice from behind me. Of course it was Karen strutting toward us in her navy blazer and oversized sunglasses, looking like she was about to storm a courtroom. She asked Greg for the preliminary numbers, which, considering he had only measured 6 feet of driveway, was completely ridiculous. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or scream. "Karen," I said, "this is my property. I told you you have no authority here. The HOA can't just come into someone's home because they feel like it." She blinked at me as if she hadn't heard anything I'd said. "I've been up all night consulting the HOA charter," she announced, as if that was supposed to impress anyone. I was starting to lose it. "Consulting the charter," I shot back. "Maybe you should have consulted a map. You're not in charge of my street." She scoffed at me, flipping open her binder to point out some random made-up document. "There's a historic pathway easement," she said. "It grants us authority over this area." I had no idea what she was talking about. "What, a historic pathway?" I repeated, half laughing. "That's a joke, right? A wagon trail hasn't existed in this area for over a century." Karen's face twisted with fake indignation. "You're arguing semantics. The HOA is within its rights." She slapped the binder again, as though the sound would settle the matter. By this point, I was done being polite. "Leave my property now." But Karen was on a roll. "Fine," she said, voice rising with mock anger. "I'll elevate the matter. I'm filing an emergency vote with the HOA tomorrow." "Good luck with that," I said, not even trying to hide my sarcasm. "You'll need more than a binder and a broken ego to stop this wedding." That's when Leo stepped forward. He'd been standing off to the side, quietly observing. Now he walked up to Karen with that calm, collected smile of his, the one he always wore when dealing with tricky situations. Actually, he said, in that way he has of sounding both polite and slightly smug, "I'd stop now if I were you. My guest is arriving tomorrow." Karen raised an eyebrow, who she sneered, clearly thinking she could outwit him. "Who's this guest?" Leo didn't miss a beat. "Someone who doesn't listen to HOA nonsense." Karen's expression shifted, confusion flickering across her face. She didn't know what he meant, but I could see she was beginning to worry. The twist was coming, and it was bigger than she could ever imagine. I stepped outside early the next morning, thinking the worst was behind us. The setup was nearly done, everything looked perfect. But then my stomach dropped. A man was standing at the end of our driveway, a measuring wheel in hand, clipboard in the other. I froze. It didn't take long to see the HOA logo on it. "No," I muttered under my breath, walking toward him. "What are you doing here?" "I'm Greg from Compliance Enforcement," he said, sounding like he was reciting a rehearsed line. "Conducting an assessment for the HOA." I stopped dead in my tracks. "The HOA," I repeated, trying to hold my temper. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" "I'm following orders from Karen," he said, nervously shifting his weight from foot to foot. "That's great," I said flatly. "Now get off my property." He hesitated, glancing nervously around the street. "I can't leave until the assessment is complete." "Wrong. You're trespassing," I snapped. "Leave. Now." Just as I thought we were done with this circus, Karen appeared walking toward us with that signature power walk of hers, as if she were about to deliver a royal decree. She asked Greg for his preliminary findings, even though he had only measured a few feet of our driveway. I was done. "Karen, get off my property," I said firmly. "You don't have authority here." She raised an eyebrow. "I've been up all night consulting the HOA charter," she said, like it was some kind of badge of honor. "We have jurisdiction over this property." At this point, I almost couldn't believe it. "Karen, you should have consulted a map. You're not in charge here." But she wasn't listening. "There's a historic pathway easement," she insisted, flipping through her trusty binder, "that grants us authority over this street." I blinked, incredulous. "A pathway easement? That trail disappeared over a century ago. Get real." But Karen was on a roll as usual, and she wasn't backing down. "It's in the charter," she declared, slapping the binder for emphasis. I was losing it. "Karen, you're wasting your time. You're not welcome here. Leave. Now." She folded her arms and stared at me, smirking like she had all the time in the world. Leo, who had been watching quietly, stepped forward. He flashed a calm smile, his usual diplomatic self. "Actually, I'd stop now, Karen," Leo said, his voice oozing politeness. "My guest arrives tomorrow." Karen's expression twisted with confusion. "Who's your guest?" she sneered. Leo smiled, cool and collected. "Someone who doesn't listen to HOA nonsense." That was when the real twist happened. I knew we were about to turn the tables on Karen, but I had no idea how big this moment would be. Later that afternoon, we got the surprise of our lives. Leo's guest arrived. And when I saw the police cruiser roll up, it all clicked. Leo's guest wasn't just anyone, it was the chief of police. The same chief who had never taken Karen seriously, and now he was here to make sure the wedding went smoothly. Karen saw the cruiser and froze. The officer got out, looked straight at her, and asked, "What exactly are you reporting?" Karen launched into her usual spiel about noise violations and illegal structures, but the officer was having none of it. He turned to me. "This is your property," I nodded. "Yes." He turned back to Karen and raised an eyebrow. "This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. There's nothing for me to enforce here." Karen's eyes widened in horror. But, she stammered clearly, losing her grip on the situation. Leo, looking absolutely unfazed, added with a casual tone, "Actually, I called this morning. Not to report a violation, but because my guest needed parking instructions." Karen's face fell. She had no idea what was coming. "That's right," the officer said, nodding. "The chief is on his way." And that's when Karen's whole world came crashing down. The chief of police wasn't here for her HOA nonsense. He was here for our wedding, and he wasn't going to let anyone ruin it. The chief arrived moments later, waved at Leo, and then turned to Karen. "Where should I park so I'm not in the way tomorrow?" It was over. Karen's plan had backfired spectacularly. The officer turned to her with a polite nod, dismissing her, while Leo's godfather casually strolled into our yard, treating it like any other wedding he had attended. Karen didn't know what to do. She stood there frozen as the chief made small talk with Leo and admired the wedding setup. She couldn't even manage to muster any last-ditch threats. She just stood there defeated. The best part, Karen wasn't finished yet, but her power had completely dissolved. Leo's godfather had made sure of that.